Welcome to Newsmakers, a co-production by the Epoch Times and NTD. I'm your host, Tiffany Meyer. Let's begin with the nation's capital, where the bid for Speaker of the House is still in deadlock. Republican Congressman Kevin McCarthy facing stiff pushback from within his own party, failing to secure enough votes after 6 rounds of voting. Here's Congresswoman Lauren Boebert on whether or not she'll be voting for McCarthy.
We made the deal. The deal was rejected. And as it stands, I will not be voting for Kevin McCarthy as Speaker.
Typically, a nominee needs 218 votes, but that number could change if members withhold their votes. Until then, if the House can't kick off the new Congress or swear in new members until a Speaker is elected, that means McCarthy could still secure the Speaker role if he can squeak by the Democratic nominee. That's Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, whom Democrats have solidified around. But first, what about other potential GOP speakers? Here's Congressman Jim Jordan.
We can never, ever let a bill like the one that passed 12 days ago, $1.7 trillion spent, we can never, ever let that kind of legislation pass again.
Now, despite the standing ovation Congressman Jim Jordan getting right there, in the second and third rounds of voting, he only secured 20 votes. That's compared to McCarthy's over 200. Still, McCarthy remains hopeful. After 6 failed rounds of voting, he told CNN, "We will get to 218. We'll solve our problems and we will all work together." The House is currently adjourned until 8 p.m. tonight. The last time the House was in turmoil over a speaker was back in 1856, when it took 2 months and 133 ballots for the House to elect its speaker. And joining us now to discuss what's going on in Congress is Mark Tapscott. Mark is a congressional correspondent for the Epoch Times. Mark, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Tiffany, how are you?
So 6 rounds of voting and still no Speaker of the House. What's the latest you've heard about this?
Well, not a whole lot has changed since the 6th vote earlier today, which Kevin McCarthy lost. He's lost 6 in a row. I think what happened this afternoon after the 6th vote is there was, for whatever reason, a sudden spurt, a mini spurt, if you will, of optimism on both sides, the McCarthy supporters and the opponents, that maybe there was a possibility that if they took some time off, got off the floor, went into some back rooms and sat down and talked, that they might finally be able to work something out. That didn't work, apparently, because about 10 minutes ago, Congressman Matt Gaetz from Florida, who is kind of the hardest core of the hardcore anti-McCarthy people, came out of the meeting and just was breathing fire and brimstone. So it doesn't look like yet that they've got any kind of deal. My expectation is that at 8 o'clock they're going to come in, and the odds are pretty good. They may talk a little bit, but they're not going to have another vote tonight. They're going to adjourn again and come back tomorrow. I could be wrong about that, but that's what it looks like at the moment.
And Mark, on that note, even in the Republican Party, Trump is saying on social media that his party needs to band around McCarthy. But why isn't that happening? Why is McCarthy facing such a hard time?
It's virtually it's analogous, if you will, to the proverbial unstoppable train running into the immovable object. McCarthy has 203 solid votes. They say they are not going to change, and then you have these 20 populist conservative dissidents who say the same thing. They are not going to change. So somehow or another, Kevin McCarthy has to find a way to convince at least 10 of these guys, 10 of them, or 12, to trust him that he will keep his word about the changes in the rules that he's already agreed to, that the 20 dissidents say they have to have in order to be able to stop the Biden administration's worst policies. It really does come down to the palpable distrust of a good many members of the House, Republicans, the conservative populist. They have heard so many promises over the years from establishment type Republicans that weren't kept. And I think for whatever reason, I don't think it has to do with Kevin McCarthy personally, but for whatever reason, this has all come together in this particular moment, and the frustration is palpable.
And Mark, to your point earlier on Gates, McCarthy has criticized Congressman Gates for apparently saying he was okay with a Democrat as Speaker over McCarthy winning. So could we actually end up with a Democratic Speaker?
I think the odds are much better that when I wake up in the morning, I will have a third ear growing out of my forehead. I don't see that happening at all. Theoretically, yes, it's possible. And yes, there are probably a handful of the moderate Republicans who might think about doing that, but I don't think it's remotely a serious threat. The deadlock is going to continue. It can't continue too long. Somebody is going to blink. Is that going to be Kevin McCarthy, or is that going to be the dissidents? We don't know yet.
And Mark, speaking of this deadlock, Republicans are getting a lot of heat over this, but what are the pros and cons of this kind of in-party debate?
You know, one of the things that has struck me, and I've followed every minute of this, there is this tremendous contrast. On the one hand, you have 212 Democrats in lockstep. They absolutely are all united behind Hakeem Jeffries, who will be their House Minority Leader. The Democrats don't permit a lot of dissent in their caucus. Everybody is following the way the leadership is telling them to go. But then over here, you have the Republicans, you know, who've got at least 4 major different factions going at each other. And as Chip Roy, the congressman from Texas, who is one of the leaders of the dissidents, said earlier today, actually, I guess it was yesterday when he said this, and I think it's one of the best lines of this whole debate. He said, he looked around the chamber and he said, so this is what it looks like when we're all actually here in the chamber having a real debate. That's been a rarity in the House of Representatives for a long time. So we've got, you know, over here, Democrats who are all saying the same thing. And over here, you have a bunch of Republicans who have some differing opinions. And I think the Republicans are closer to democracy than the Democrats are.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us. Definitely quite a lot happening there.
My pleasure, Tiffany.
And coming up after the break, we are joined by the founder and president of the Article 3 Project, Mike Davis. He's here to give us a breakdown of what's happening with Republicans in Congress and the bitter battle of the House Speaker role.
Everything that's reported on television isn't always true, but it should be. NTD, the power of truth. Now available 24/7 on television and streaming platforms.
NTD's Capitol Report. It's about getting answers, cutting through the fog of politics. It's about your questions and our chances to ask.
What is the net impact of the American
Congressman Graves, thank you for joining us.
We're speaking to those in power to find out what does this mean for the people. We're here so you are in the know.
Navigating a world of economic madness, you need to have the right guide. What do today's decisions mean for your tomorrow? We ask why. What's the alternative? Uncover the deeper reasons and the hidden influences, and highlight the real opportunities for profit. At Entity Business, we connect the dots for you. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Entity Business. I'm Paul Green.
At The Nation Speaks, we don't just scratch the surface. We want to go wide and deep. Our viewers come away with a much richer understanding of the issues of the day. We really make a big effort to bring on different voices onto the show. We don't just talk to experts and newsmakers, which of course are extremely important, but we also want to hear from the American people. So the people who are impacted by the policies and issues that we're talking about, because what they have to say is just as important to the national conversation.
Welcome back. As we were just discussing, the Republicans haven't exactly come together over electing a House Speaker. And as America looks on with bewilderment and maybe even a touch of horror, one big question emerges. What does this fighting at the start of a new congressional term mean for the rest of the year, for the next 2 years even? And why are Republicans fighting? Is there a bigger issue at play here? Joining us to give us his analysis of the situation is Mike Davis. Mike is the founder and president of the Article 3 Project. He's also the former chief counsel for nominations to Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley and law clerk to Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. Mike, thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you.
Thank you.
So to begin, what does the Republican infighting say about what we can expect over the coming congressional term?
I think this is a very healthy fight. For too long, House Republicans have had selections instead of elections with their House Republican leadership, their Senate leadership. Elections are good, debates are good. We need to figure out what we want to be as a Republican Party and what the House Republicans need to be as a caucus. And I think this is a very healthy debate. I don't think Kevin McCarthy should be Speaker. He doesn't have the votes to be Speaker, as we've seen over the last 6 or 7 roll call votes, however it's been on the floor. He's known he doesn't have the support to be Speaker. He doesn't have 218 House Republicans. He's known that for at least 2 months. And it's unfortunate that for him, I'm not hearing a compelling argument why Kevin McCarthy is the indispensable one, the only one who could be Speaker. I hear a lot of people say that he's a uniparty DC establishment insider who's not going to bring the necessary change that we need in Washington.
Expanding on your point, why don't some of the GOP leaders want McCarthy as Speaker?
Well, I don't know if it's the leaders. I think it's the rank and file. I think it's the conservative, grassroots, populist conservatives out there in the real world, real Americans in the real world. This is the only branch of government, the House, that Republicans will control. And we need to make sure we have a fighter in there who's going to fight for the American people, everyday Americans in the real world, and not corporate interest in Washington like Kevin McCarthy has been known to do. He will fight for corporate interest. He'll fight for big tech monopolists, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. When big tech was censoring, silencing, deplatforming, and canceling conservatives, including President Trump, Kevin McCarthy was taking their money and doing their bidding. We can't have that anymore. He needs to go.
And Mike, who are some of the Republican alternatives for Speaker then, and why some Republicans see them as a better option?
I think the most obvious consensus pick who can get 218 votes is Steve Scalise. He's the #2 House Republican now. He was unanimously elected to the #2 slot when Kevin McCarthy lost a lot of Republican support when he was nominated for Speaker before his floor vote over the last 2 days. Steve Scalise is a principled conservative. He's a good person. He's not the perfect pick. He has flaws just like everyone else, but he's the guy who can actually get 218 House Republican votes and lead the conference.
And on that, it seems Scalise has said he won't go up against McCarthy. So do you think Republicans eventually will come together behind McCarthy, or how do you see this playing out?
No, McCarthy's done. He needs to realize that he's done. There are 20 hard no votes against him. We've seen that in roll call vote after roll call vote after roll call vote. At 8 p.m. tonight, they're going to come out of their House Republican conference. Kevin McCarthy made several mistakes. He didn't woo enough detractors. He didn't listen to them. He ignored them. He was arrogant. He tried to just run them over, and it's backfiring. He literally moved into the speaker's office before he secured the votes to be speaker. He's just played this race as badly as you can play it.
And Mike, what do you make of Republicans like Representative Gates saying they'd be okay with a Democratic speaker like Rep. Jeffries?
That's absolutely not true. That is Kevin McCarthy and his paid AstroTurf supporters putting out this wrong information. That's absolutely not true. There is no chance that a Democrat will become speaker. That is a scare tactic by Kevin McCarthy to get people to cave and vote for him. He's the most uninspiring speaker we've ever seen for Republican, or speaker candidate we've ever seen for Republicans in a long time, and that's why he doesn't have the support, just like he didn't have the support, I think it was back in 2014 when he ran for speaker.
And Mike, what do you think the public is making of all of this in-party fighting? What's their take?
I don't think the American people really care that much one way or the other. I know inside D.C., this is like the most consequential thing that's ever happened to them. I think it's amazing that D.C. establishment Republicans did nothing about COVID for 3 years, let COVIDians rule our lives for 3 years, BLM and Antifa destroy our cities, gender chaos in schools, mutilating kids with gender-affirming care. These establishment Republicans didn't show any concern about that, but all of a sudden, they want to pull fire alarms because we can't elect a speaker in 2 days. Who cares? No one cares. We'll have a speaker. It will be Speaker Scalise, and House Republicans will be better for it.
And Mike, what's your take on how this might impact 2024?
I think if we elect Kevin McCarthy as our speaker, he's going to be a uniparty establishment speaker who will not draw a sharp enough contrast with Democrats like he didn't do last time. This is why he's going to lose the speakership. He didn't win enough House seats. We lost Senate seats. The election was bad in 2022 because Republicans were not bold. They didn't draw a sharp contrast with Biden and Democrats, and that's why we need a new speaker. That's why Kevin McCarthy, who failed in 2022, cannot be the speaker going into 2024.
And Mike, just really quickly at the end, what's the biggest pros and cons of this debate?
I think the biggest pro of this debate is that DC insiders, lobbyists, the establishment don't get to pick who runs, who wins these elections. There's actual elections in this country. This is what they do with the spending bills. They wait till the very last minute. They negotiate these spending bills in smoke-filled rooms behind closed doors. They come up at the last minute and say to the rank and file, you need to vote for this spending bill, even though it's a horrific spending bill, or the country is going to fall apart. They're doing the same thing with this speaker race. This is a good way for the rank and file Republicans in the House to take back control of the House. Instead of DC lobbyists running it, the rank and file Republicans who are accountable to their constituents back home are running it like the founders intended.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And coming up after the break, we are joined by senior researcher Thomas Hogan. 2023 just started, but we're already getting conflicting messages about the economy this year. Thomas is here with insights. Join us after the break. Welcome back. 2023 just started, and already there are conflicting economic predictions. The Wall Street Journal surveyed 23 large financial institutions, and 2/3 expect the U.S. economy to contract in 2023. Citi Global Wealth Investments went so far as to say unemployment could top 5%, and the economy could lose 2 million jobs this year. But on the other hand, some banks like JP Chase and Goldman Sachs think America is okay. It's not heading towards a recession at all. So who's correct? Or is the truth somewhere in the middle? Joining us to discuss the latest with the economy and what we can expect in 2023 is Thomas Hogan. Thomas is currently a senior research faculty at the American Institute for Economic Research. And he was formerly the chief economist for the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be on.
So recession or depression or inflation, what's your take on the economy this year?
Well, I think you're right that most economists are predicting a recession this year. We saw a survey from Bloomberg that found that about 70% of economists were predicting a recession. And as you mentioned, that survey of major financial institutions, they're also predicting a recession. But most of them are predicting a rather mild recession. And in fact, my outlook as well is not terribly pessimistic. I think it's possible that if we do have a recession, which appears likely, but we might possibly avoid it. And if we do have one, hopefully it will be relatively mild. And that's a much more positive outlook than we were seeing, just a few months ago.
And we are hearing a lot about inflation and America's growing debt. So what's the most significant factors negatively influencing the economy right now?
Yeah, you're right. So inflation continues to be a problem, is really one of the big question marks still. So inflation obviously has been a terrible problem in the last few years. Part of that has been policy from the United States Federal Reserve, our central bank that manages the money supply by buying bonds and managing interest rates. And so the Fed expanded the economy too much and really caused a lot of the inflation that we've seen over the last couple of years. And so there are some signs now that inflation has stabilized or is even potentially coming down. And so that's one of the things that has made people a little bit more optimistic about this year. There was a lot of fear that we could end up in a situation of stagflation that would be high inflation and low economic growth, or even a very bad recession or depression. But because inflation is coming down and because the downturn appears to be a little bit more mild than expected, I and other economists are a little bit more hopeful about the situation.
And speaking of your more positive outlook, what are some of these positive factors or trends we should be aware of?
Right. So inflation appears to be starting to come down. Depending on what numbers we look at, it's either kind of stable or slightly ticking down. But importantly, people's expectations of inflation have started to decline. So there was a big worry that people would start expecting high inflation year after year after year, and that doesn't appear to be the case. Most Americans seem to think the economy is getting back to normal. The other thing is that on the employment side, I think you mentioned some of these surveys, people are saying that there's going to be a recession, but they're really only predicting unemployment going up to about 5%, which is bad. We don't want anyone to lose their jobs, but the long run average in the United States is about 6%. And so even if unemployment goes up to 5%, that's still lower than the long run average and not as bad as we were expecting. Just a few months ago, people thought it would have been much worse.
On that point of a potential recession, what can Congress do, or is there anything Congress can do to stop or ease a recession?
Well, the biggest thing is the Federal Reserve policy. As the central bank, they really have a big effect on short-run outcomes in the United States. And they had pushed the economy too hard in the recovery that had caused a lot of the inflation, and had finally admitted that they were a source of that inflation, started raising interest rates. And so now they're at the point where inflation is starting to come down. And so that's the biggest question, is if we have an economic downturn, what is the Fed going to do? Are they going to continue raising interest rates as they've been doing, or are they going to respond by lowering interest rates to try to stimulate the economy? Hopefully inflation comes down enough that they'll have a little bit more leeway, and if needed, can stimulate the economy to prevent a recession, or at least prevent it from being too bad.
Expanding on that point, what kind of policies might the Fed or Congress adopt to help American families if a recession fully emerges?
Right. So if we do head towards a recession, it seems likely that the Fed will probably be in a good enough situation to be able to cut interest rates and respond and try to stimulate the economy to get us towards a normal growth path. In terms of things that Congress can do, well, they've been basically doing too much the last few years. They've been spending a lot, and that's increased our debt, and in the long run, that's going to be a very big factor. That they had been potentially spending money, too much money and too much on things that weren't really necessary. And so if we could cut a lot of that spending for the next few years, it's definitely going to come down some because we won't be doing the big pandemic stimulus bills that we had previously done. But if they can rein in their spending a little bit more compared to the last couple of years, that would be helpful, and potentially even cut some regulations and allow businesses to keep going and keep the economy growing. That would be great.
And Thomas, lastly, it seems last year there was a lot of focus on, say, what's happening in Ukraine and the rising gas prices and the pandemic spending. But this year, what are the biggest areas you're watching out for?
Yeah, that's true. So some of the things that were a big problem last year hopefully won't be as large of a problem again. So we passed through the pandemic period. We passed through the initial part of Russia's war with Ukraine, where a lot of American businesses had to pull out from Russia, and a big disruption in international trade. And so hopefully those things are behind us. We still, that war is ongoing, but even if it has an impact, it hopefully won't be nearly as big as the initial shock that hurt so many American businesses in their international trade. And so, I think that is international factors are somewhat of a question. China as well. China's had this big slowdown because of their serious COVID policies, and that's harmed a lot of American producers that get some of their goods from China. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with them. And then domestically, the things that we talked about, we've got a brand new Congress, and we'll have to see what their domestic agenda is. It's a divided Congress now, with the Republicans controlling the House and the Democrats controlling the Senate. And so probably not as much spending, and hopefully that will allow the economy to grow this year better than we've been, or continue what we've been doing in the past.
Thomas, thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And coming up after the break, we're joined by Dr. Li-Man Yang, who's here to discuss China, COVID, and what's really happening in the famously tight-lipped nation. You won't want to miss it.
The lasting beauty of realistic oil painting. Brilliant, expressive, and inspirational. The 6th NTD International Figure Painting Competition. Guided by pure authenticity, beauty, and goodness. Invites you to join us on a journey back to traditional art. The Gold Award is $10,000. For more details, please visit oilpainting.ntdtv.com.
It's just clear as day. The media, whether it's broadcast, cable, or print media, has become extremely biased. And I started looking online for alternative ways to get information. And I saw an ad for a free trial. And I looked at it and I said, Epoch Times. I mean, come on, this is end of days type of stuff. I mean, what are they going to be talking about here? And I said, well, it's a free trial. Let me dig in. Is it giving me both sides? Is it giving me an objective point of view here? I have looked for opportunities to see where they might be biased, and I don't find it. It has given me a level of trust in media that I didn't think I'd ever get back. I love the Epoch Times because it has renewed my faith in the idea that a reliable, responsible, non-biased source of information is available. And I can say that I love it because of that.
Welcome back. Let's turn to China and the unprecedented havoc being wrought by COVID right now. China's massive population of 1.4 billion people almost simultaneously exposed to the virus. Following the regime's draconian zero-COVID policy of lockdowns and isolation, much of the population hasn't had the time to develop natural immunity. Now, hundreds of millions are infected within weeks, a rate not seen elsewhere. And above everything, the haze of uncertainty. What is the death toll? Are there new variants? Has the virus mutated? The Chinese regime's lack of transparency and history of underreporting adding to the questions. Officially, the regime reporting COVID deaths in the single digits. That's in contrast with on-the-ground reports, funeral homes working overtime, and hospitals overwhelmed. And with the lack of transparency, what should or can other countries do? Joining us to discuss China and its COVID outbreak is Dr. Yan Limong, a Chinese virologist who fled to the United States in 2020. Dr. Yan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invite.
We're seeing right now a phenomenon that we haven't seen since the beginning of COVID back in Wuhan, and that's the white lung phenomenon that's showing up on CT scan. So what is it and what's behind this?
So the thing is, what happened in China is an outbreak even worse than what happened in Wuhan. Until now, within 3 to 4 weeks from early December, the majority of Chinese people are infected. And also, I can tell you, this is not because their lack of natural immunity, because China government didn't protect people during COVID, zero COVID period. It's just more about digital control. However, the symptoms now is even worse than what happened in Wuhan, and the white lung come out again. The government insists that it's Omicron variant, which is mild, but government still refuse to give the viral sequence examination to patients. So we really don't know what is happening in China. We just know death toll is increased like crazy.
Speaking of that, international health experts are predicting there will be at least 1 million deaths in China this year, while the Chinese regime has officially reported 3 new COVID deaths on Monday. So what do you make of these very different numbers?
Yeah, of course, China is still hiding the facts and even the basic fact. That is, the government always cheat people. But why does he cheat? Because the government need to cheat you to achieve their own purpose. This time still, they don't tell you the death tolls. However, based on our first-hand information, that in almost every city in China, the funeral place is overloaded, and the government doesn't allow people to fill the death cause as COVID-19, but the death toll increase in some area even over 10 times every day. That can clearly tell you the death toll would be even out of 1 million within several months.
And doctor, starting this Sunday, China is officially allowing its citizens to travel abroad. Should this concern the rest of the world?
Of course, that's why I keep telling people that first, you don't know what is happening in China. Even if the very mild variant circulating among population and cause such severe disease, then it should get new variant which would be more virulent, right? So with this possibility, when China refused to do the test and also share the information, why does the other government allow them to send people here? Because once it happened, you would have the possibility to face an even larger pandemic than what happened in 2020. China cheated you already, and why do you allow it to cheat you again?
And on that note, what can other countries do then to help mitigate more waves of COVID?
So first, doing the PCR examination for the travelers from China, especially for the people who come from mainland China. And also you have to establish some quarantine policy during that period, because we know virus incubation period can be 3 to 14 days or even longer. And also you have to prepare the medical support, including medicines like the hydroxychloroquine, Ivermectin, or like this. and also oxygen facilities and other support to do the backup if the outbreak come to your country. And if not, there would be another tragedy happen here, and also that would crush the society immediately.
And doctor, with the Chinese regime's lack of transparency, history of underreporting, what's their end game here? What are they trying to do?
We really don't know exactly what they are going to do, because this is a government full of secrets and it's an anti-human government. However, what we know is for sure this COVID-19 virus was studied in the military civilian fusion labs for years, and it was weaponized. And so that's why when it happened in 2020, although it got out of control in China, but still Chinese Communist government let it intentionally spread all over the world and make the pandemic. So we should know Xi Jinping already celebrates the trophy during the pandemic, and he awarded the PLA scientists, and also they are developing more and more biomedical industries. Even now, they announced, China CDC claims that they predict that there will be super immune escape new variant come out soon. And they also tell you they already are working on the new drugs, mono antibody or others, to compete the new immune escape variant. So this is very scary. And Xi Jinping is so aggressive now, both inside China and to overseas. So we really need to consider it based on geopolitical situation and more factors.
And doctor, lastly, how do we make sure to differentiate between the Chinese regime and the Chinese people?
We Chinese people are not the one like this kind of anti-human policies. How to distinguish this is a good question, because Chinese people were born in China, were cultivated from young time with brainwash, this kind of propaganda. So it's not easy for majority of Chinese people to realize the evilness of CCP. However, you can see what people's working on. If the person not help Chinese Communist Party, not work in the organization, not behave as their overseas that kind of unite front member, or their people, the agents or agents like influencer, then we can say that this person is probably the good Chinese people, and once they know the evilness, they would change their mind. But the people who already work inside and now still refuse to change their attitude, still working with Xi Jinping and change the world, enjoy it, then that's a very loyal CCP member, and we should put them to the trial.
Dr. Yan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And coming up after the break, we are joined by Dr. Scott Atlas. He's here to discuss the latest on China and its COVID-19 outbreak. Join us after the break.
We are being censored. America's news outlets no longer provide the truth. 90% of news outlets in the United States are controlled by 6 corporations. They're not out to tell you the truth of what's happening. They're out to tell you the picture of the world that they represent. The Epoch Times is independent. We're not controlled by any special interest, and we never will be. This is a battle between truth and deceit. A battle between forces that would ensnare this country in ignorance, and between a media that wants to present you with the truth. Subscribe today to our digital edition at theepochtimes.com and join the Americans who are seeking truth and tradition. Read the difference on all your devices. We'd love to have you on board.
Welcome back. China is opening its doors amid its escalating COVID crisis, and the Western world is not amused. Multiple countries have adopted measures to stem the influx of new COVID-19 cases to their countries. Beijing's response to those measures, unacceptable, it says. In fact, the Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning stated, "We believe that the entry restrictions adopted by some countries targeting China lack scientific basis, and some excessive practices are even more unacceptable." So are the measures unacceptable? And can anything really stem the COVID tide? We tried before and it didn't seem to work out too well. Joining us to discuss that and more is Epoch Times contributor and senior fellow at the Hoover Institution of Stanford, Dr. Scott Atlas. Dr. Atlas was also a special advisor and member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force under President Trump. Dr. Scott Atlas, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
To begin, should Americans worry about China opening up its borders? Why or why not?
Well, not if you believe in the scientific data. And why do I say that? Well, first of all, the Omicron variants that are in China right now, according to the WHO, are variants that are not very lethal. They're not particularly dangerous. Secondly, more than 90% of people in the United States have had COVID and have biological protection, or have had most have had the vaccine. In fact, almost all high-risk people in the United States have had the vaccine or have had COVID. And so, of course, it's not dangerous for that reason, for a serious consequence. Third, the recent data that came out just a couple days ago from Stanford, Johnny Anidi's group, showed on reviewing the lethality of COVID during the pre-vaccine era, the most lethal form of the virus, not this Omicron variant, the most lethal one, the data shows that the infection fatality rate is even lower than we thought. In fact, for people under 20, it's lower than influenza for people under 20. And for non-elderly, it's very low. So I think that, at some point, we have to realize what the facts are. And stop this almost bizarre flat earth kind of behavior. Lastly, as you sort of alluded to, we already did the blocking of people. In fact, the United States has been blocking non-citizens from entering since for years now without a COVID test. How did that work out? More than 90% of people in the United States have had COVID. I mean, do we care about the facts? Or do we keep behaving like people who don't, who don't understand the earth is round?
And Doctor, to your point, other countries are adopting restrictions for travelers coming from China. Is that a good policy?
Well, it doesn't surprise me. And the reason it doesn't surprise me is because we have seen this complete denial of fact, a complete, absence of acceptance of natural, of decades, in fact, centuries of biology. There is, honestly, I said this a long time ago, the people in charge will never admit the pandemic is over in the United States. The people in charge will never admit, that the biological protection after having COVID is significant. The people, 2/3 of people who died in the United States from COVID, from the lethal form of this virus, had greater than or equal to 6 comorbidities. So we're talking about a totally different, era now. We're talking about Omicron variants that are not particularly lethal. We're talking about populations that have basically have protection. I just don't even understand what's going on here. The irony of the whole thing is for China leadership to call the refusal of people to enter Chinese people to enter who are infected as pseudoscience. The Chinese have been the most pseudoscience people in the world. The leadership there doing these draconian lockdowns, frankly, barbaric treatment of their own citizens, a complete human rights violation against all science, particularly when we know that the lockdowns do not work. And that's been proven not just in this pandemic, the standard pandemic management from 2006, the paper by Henderson, which is the classic review, the lockdowns, A, don't work, and B, they're extremely harmful. And by the way, in that paper, Henderson and colleagues specifically state that border blockage for travel, whether air or rail, does not stop the spread of the infection.
And Doctor, lastly, China has been notoriously tight-lipped about COVID happening in the country. Are you expecting new and possibly more pathogen strains to emerge?
Well, I mean, there's two parts to your question. Number one, China has been tight-lipped. We don't know the data really of what's going on there. We can't trust them. If we trust them, it's sort of silly at this point. On the other hand, when you look at the case data, and this is something the viewers should know, the cases started before they started opening. The cases were starting to come up dramatically in November, and that's validated by the WHO itself. That's a side point. But your other question is, do we expect more variants, more mutants, more strains? The answer is yes. That's what happens with viruses that are sort of, if you want to think of it this way, fighting for survival against a population that has protection, whether biological or vaccine related. Viruses mutate. They mutate. That's sort of the natural way that biology works, to be able to infect and survive, but they are typically far less lethal. That is exactly what we've been seeing with this pandemic. The pandemic did behave exactly pretty much as standard virus pandemics end, which is they mutate, they still retain contagiousness, but they become far less serious, far less lethal. So we should expect that. The virus will not be eradicated. It will not go away from lockdowns. There is an animal reservoir present. This is not a virus that will completely disappear.
Dr. Scott Atlas, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
And coming up after the break, we are joined by Katie Spence. Katie is a Epoch Times reporter, and she recently took a deep dive into the controversy surrounding the FDA, saying it did not prohibit the use of ivermectin. You don't want to miss it.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us.
There's reporting that can be trusted. There are programs that can inspire every generation. There is a television network worth watching and sharing. Our commitment is to bring you the facts and to show you the world. We won't be divided by politics, and we won't be swayed by the dollar. We believe in the strength of our nation and the hope in our shared humanity. We are NTD Television, and we are proud to bring you news you can trust and programs that make you smile. NTD Television, now available 24/7 on television and streaming platforms.
Freedom is not free, and neither is the truth. In order to bring you the facts, our reporters are out there on the front lines getting the true story. Some of them served 10 years of prison in China. We've been censored on social media. Our Hong Kong printing offices were set on fire, and we've been repeatedly attacked by the Chinese Communist Party. But no matter what, we believe that you deserve the truth, and so we'll continue to bring the truth to light. Head on over to getepic.com and try honest journalism that is based in truth and tradition. We'd love to have you on board.
NTD's Capital Report. It's about getting answers, cutting through the fog of politics. It's about your questions and our chances to ask.
What is the net impact of the American
Congressman Graves, thank you for joining us.
We're speaking to those in power to find out what does this mean for the people. We're here so you're in the know.
Welcome back. We're still feeling the effects of COVID 3 years after it first started wreaking havoc on the world, and there still seem to be more questions than answers. For example, where did COVID come from? How long has it been circulating? What's next in terms of variants? How can we effectively treat it? Well, for some healthcare workers, the answer to how to effectively treat COVID-19 lies in ivermectin. And they've been using it almost since the pandemic started. But the FDA disagrees with this approach. In fact, even though the FDA approved ivermectin for human use in 1996, it labeled it as a livestock medication via a tweet and not fit for human consumption. The health professionals who disagreed and continue to prescribe it, well, they faced threats from the New York Attorney General, threats from medical boards, and threats from pharmacies. In many cases, healthcare workers were fired, suspended, and targeted for harassment over their stance on ivermectin. And that resulted in a court case where 3 doctors are arguing the FDA illegally interfered with their doctor-patient relationship, resulting in harm. The FDA's defense? Its stance on ivermectin was merely a suggestion. Joining us to discuss healthcare workers' reaction to the FDA's defense is Epoch Times reporter Katie Spence. Her latest feature story took a deep dive into this issue. Katie, thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
The FDA says it didn't prohibit using ivermectin in treating COVID-19, but healthcare workers are arguing their experiences beg to differ. What happened to healthcare workers who prescribe ivermectin to their patients?
Right, so it varied from state to state, from practice to practice, and from medical board to medical board, but most of the time they were targeted and licenses were threatened to be suspended. They had patients that said they wouldn't go to them anymore. They said the FDA was saying one thing and they were hearing another from their doctor. They've been targeted by other members in the media for harassment.
And Katie, from what you found, why did healthcare workers insist on continuing to prescribe ivermectin?
Because it works. I mean, that's the basic bottom line. They were saying there's nothing else that's working. These patients are coming to me. They can't breathe. I'm going to try it, and it worked.
And has the pushback against healthcare workers prescribing ivermectin stopped?
No, it hasn't stopped. And that's kind of what a lot of doctors are saying. They want people to know. Their licenses are still up for review in front of boards. They're still not able to get jobs in hospitals or clinics. They're still getting pushback.
And Katie, from your research, why do healthcare workers believe ivermectin was targeted specifically?
They believe that ivermectin was targeted specifically because in order to approve a vaccine under an emergency use authorization, you can't have an effective treatment for a disease. And that is what they're saying they believe was the catalyst to saying don't use ivermectin, because ivermectin worked. If ivermectin works, you can't use an EAU.
And how do healthcare workers feel about the FDA saying it didn't prohibit using ivermectin for COVID-19?
They're pretty upset. I feel, just talking to a handful of them, there's a general consensus that there was significant pushback, and it was directed from the FDA down to the clinics, down to the medical boards. And so what they saw was their doctor-patient relationships being impeded by what the FDA was saying.
And Katie, lastly, what was the biggest takeaway you found while doing this research?
The biggest takeaway I found while doing this research is just how much these doctors and healthcare workers faced. These are people who don't have a political bias. They don't have anything to gain. They just want to treat patients, and they want to see them get better. They don't want to see them end up in the hospital. They don't want to see them die. And they were just doing the best that they could, and they were really targeted for that.
Incredible. Well, Katie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all from us tonight here on Newsmakers. We'll be back next Wednesday night with a brand new show. We look forward to seeing you then. Have a good night.